4 children vanished from the suburbs of Detroit between the winters of 1976 and 1977. They were taken in broad daylight, off sidewalks, from candy stores, from the most ordinary places a kid could be. And when their bodies were found, they had been cleaned. Their clothes had been laundered. They had been fed and kept alive for days before they were killed, and then laid in the snow like they were meant to be found. Nobody was ever charged. Nobody was ever convicted. And for nearly 50 years, the Oakland County Child Killer has remained one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history. But in June of 2026, something changed. One of the longest-standing suspects in the case, a man named Arch Sloan, was lying in a prison hospice ward, dying at the age of 84. And in his final hours, detectives sat down beside him one last time. And he talked. Jill Robinson was 12. She vanished on December 22, 1977, after a fight with her mother. She was found on December 26th, the day after Christmas, on the side of Interstate 75. She had been shot in the face with a shotgun. There were no signs of sexual assault. Unlike the others, she appeared to have been killed quickly. Kristine Mihelich was 10. She was abducted on January 2, 1977, from a 7-Eleven in Berkeley. She was found 19 days later. 19 days. Smothered. Like Mark, she had been kept alive. Like Mark, she had been cared for. The person who killed her had kept her for almost 3 weeks before leaving her body in the snow. And then there was Timothy King, 11 years old. Abducted on March 16, 1977, from a drugstore in Birmingham. He was found 7 days later in Livonia. He had been sexually assaulted and suffocated. His last meal had been Kentucky Fried Chicken, the exact meal he had told his parents he wanted when he got home. Someone had fed him that meal before killing him.
4 children, 4 abductions, 4 murders across 13 months. The city of Detroit and the surrounding suburbs locked down. Parents pulled their children inside. Strangers were no longer strangers. They were suspects. It was, at the time, the largest murder investigation in United States history. And they never solved it. Investigators worked through thousands of tips. They interviewed hundreds of people. They set up one of the first major task forces in Michigan law enforcement history. And over the years, they developed 3 primary persons of interest: Christopher Bush, Ted Lamborghini, and Arch Sloan. Christopher Bush was a convicted child sex offender from a wealthy Oakland County family. He was polygraphed. He failed. A sketch found in his apartment after his death bore a disturbing resemblance to one of the victims. Bush was found dead in November of 1978, a reported suicide, though some investigators and family members have never accepted that conclusion. He never faced any charges in the child killings. Ted Lamborghini was a retired auto worker connected to a child sex ring operating in Detroit's Cass Corridor in the 1970s. He refused to take a polygraph about the Oakland County murders. He eventually received a life sentence for crimes against children. He said nothing about the child killings. Then there was Arch Sloan. Archibald Edward Sloan was a convicted child sex offender with a record stretching back decades. He preyed on young boys in the neighborhoods where he lived. He was the kind of man who had been in and out of the criminal justice system so many times that authorities knew his name by the mid-1970s. When Mark Stebbins was found, Sloan's parole officer, suggested that police investigate whether Sloan might be connected. Police searched Sloan's 1966 Pontiac Bonneville in 1976. They took tapings from the interior. They collected hairs, fibers, and other trace material. At the time, forensic science didn't have the tools to make anything of what they found, so Sloan was released. He was not charged. Decades passed. The case never closed, but it went cold in the way that cases go cold, gradually, as detectives retired, as witnesses died, as families began to wonder if they would ever see justice in their lifetimes. Then, in 2012, new forensic testing changed everything. The FBI ran mitochondrial DNA analysis on the hairs recovered from Sloan's Bonneville. The results were staggering. The hairs found in that car matched hairs found on the bodies of Mark Stebbins and Timothy King. A third hair, found in Timothy King's nasal cavity during autopsy and never previously analyzed due to a mislabeling error, also matched. But the hairs did not belong to Arch Sloan. They belonged to someone else, someone who had been in that car, someone who had also, somehow, been in contact with at least 2 of the murdered children. Investigators wanted to know who else drove that Bonneville. They wanted to know who Sloan's associates were. They set up a tip line and asked the public, "Do you remember seeing this car? Do you remember who drove it? Do you remember Arch Sloan?" Sloan was polygraphed. He failed the polygraph when asked specifically about the murder of Timothy King. He denied involvement. He gave nothing up. For years, that was the wall investigators hit every time they came near Arch Sloan. A wall of silence from a man who had already lost everything. A man serving 2 life sentences with nothing left to trade. By June of 2026, Arch Sloan was 84 years old. He had been placed in hospice care on June 9th inside the Gus Harrison Correctional Facility in Adrian, Michigan. He was dying, and detectives, the same ones who had been working this case for years, the same ones who had hit every wall, followed every lead, and reopened every file, they came to see him one last time. According to sources who spoke to WXYZ investigator Heather Catallo, those detectives sat with Sloan in his final hours. And this time, he talked. He gave them new information, new leads, something they could follow. The nature of what he said has not been released to the public. Investigators have been careful to say only that there is new information to pursue. Arch Sloan died on June 12, 2026. For the families of the 4 children who were killed, this news arrived the way most news in this case has arrived: complicated, incomplete, and wrapped in the long grief of not knowing. Kristine Mihelich's sister, Erica Ashcroft, has said that she cannot conclude Sloan was responsible for Kristine's death, but she has been clear that whatever he was, he spent his life destroying the lives of children. The families still wait. Timothy King's sister, Kathy Broad, has spent years compiling evidence, pushing for retesting, demanding answers. Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard, who was a rookie officer during the original investigation, has dedicated resources to the case and spoken about using artificial intelligence to process the enormous volume of tips and data points collected over 5 decades. The Michigan State Police have said the case is still open, that new technology is still being applied, that as new tips come in, they are fully investigated. But Kristine Mihelich's family has said they haven't heard from law enforcement in years. That is the shape of this case. A case where 1 door opens and 3 more remain locked. A case where the man who may have known the most just died. And what he said in those final hours is still somewhere in a detective's notes, still being followed, still unresolved. 4 children were killed. Their bodies were cleaned and left in the snow, arranged as if the killer wanted them to be seen, whatever that means. Whoever that person was, they have never answered for it. And somewhere in whatever Arch Sloan said to those detectives in the last hours of his life, there may be something that finally brings this to an end. Or there may not be. That's the cruelty of this case. It is always offered the shape of an answer without the answer itself. If you know anything, if you remember Arch Sloan, if you remember his car, if you were in Oakland County in 1976 or 1977 and something you saw never made sense until now, the case is still open. The families are still waiting. And somewhere in Michigan, in a detective's notes, in a new lead that hasn't been followed to its end yet, 4 children are still waiting too.